Excellent. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first Performance Audit and Risk Committee for 2026. Firstly, I'll just open up by asking if we've got any apologies. I note that Councillor Hopkins is not here at the moment, and so could I ask somebody move that we accept an apology for lateness? Moved by Councillor McCone, seconded by Councillor Ryan. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. That's carried. I'll also just ask now if there are any declarations of interest that aren't already on the register. Oh, and if not, we will move into agenda item 4, please, which is confirmation of the minutes from the Performance Audit and Risk Committee on 9 December. Does anybody have any comments or feedback? Mayor Taverneau.
Just one little thing, just moving me into present rather than attendance because I am a committee member.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And just on that, just to clarify, I think there have been some movements with members over the past little while, and so I'll just make sure everybody's aware of who the members are of the Performance Audit Risk Committee at the moment, as per I think the council decision again of the 9th December. So we've got myself acting as interim chair, Sven as deputy chair, John McCone, Jim Hopkins, France Schlack, Dan Lewis, and Rebecca Ryan, who's now subbed in for you, Brent, as a member of the PAR. So, and then Mel, of course, is a member also. So we'll just clarify that just for everybody's benefit. Any other feedback on the minutes from the December 9 meeting? Oh, if not, can I ask someone move to accept them? Moved by Mel, seconded by Sven. All those in favour? Against? Again, that's carried. And we'll move into the meaty stuff now. So agenda item 5, reports of the Chief Executive and staff for information. Because of the 6-weekly cycle or delayed cycle that we're moving into at the moment with the Christmas break, we've got a couple of financial reports today, Amanda, one being the as at end of November 25, and then the other one being as at end of the second quarter. And so how do you want to take this? Shall we move quickly through the November one and then focus on the end of Q2? All right, I'll hand over to you then, please.
Okay, so yeah, the story's pretty similar. The main theme for both reports is at 30 November and 31 December. In terms of the P&L, our income is behind budget, and largely due to grants expected to be received for the event centre and Forester Gallery. It's just a timing thing. We expected that quite early in the front end of this financial year, and so the budget expected all of that revenue to be received ahead of the spend. And it hasn't been at that point in time, and our expenditure is also over budget. So that's when your revenue is lower and your expenditure is higher, it doesn't help the bottom line at all. So the main 31 December report is actually missing the P&L, so I've handed that out just because we've got a new system and we've copied and pasted it over. It's lost that image, so that details the numbers and more breakdowns. But in terms of the narrative, it's all there explaining why the revenue is higher, lower, and the expenditure is higher. And then the balance sheet is pretty much as expected. I mean, not much to report there. Just noting that the budget for the balance sheet is always as at 30 June. So it's still 6 months ahead. We just have the year-end budget target that we're trying to reach. And this is the actuals of 31 December. So a lot of them will write themselves by the time you get to 30 June. So there's like big variances, say, for example, property, plant and equipment, because we've got a lot of assets to build and depreciation to expense. So that's why there's quite a difference there. But just bear in mind that they're tracking against 2 different periods for the balance sheet. And then the normal story, cash, we're trying to keep as low as possible and keep out any extra cash just repaying debt in the same manner that we have in the last year or so. Capital expenditure is quite behind in a few key projects. So it's sitting at 31 December, it was about 25 million spent against $32 million budget for the 6 months. And that's timing differences. It's quite hard when we set our budget to know when the actual projects will be tendered and up and running, and when the costs will come in. So we kind of set the budget just divided by 12 sort of thing throughout the year. And we do think that when we get to 30 June that the capital expenditure will be behind budget. So when we start to go through the budget for the next financial year, 2027, there'll probably be about $10 million worth of costs that we thought we would complete in this financial year that will be carried forward into the next year's budget. So yeah, we expect that capital expenditure will remain behind budget right until 30 June. That's everything I wanted to highlight for that report.
Thank you. So, I mean, I've got quite a few questions and comments on the two combined. So, I propose that we move to accept the November report, and then we can speak to the December one. But is there anything specific that people want to talk to on the November report, Councillor Mackay?
Yeah, I just have one question. It's on page 14 of the November, the first report, and it says a portion of the cost will be capitalised to the balance sheet as far as personnel costs and building an asset. Is that not part of the operational side? You're hiring staff to build an asset as opposed to capitalising that cost?
Yes, so that's a really good question, and it goes to the heart of one of the discussion points that I'd like to talk to in today's PAR. We've already been told in the 2025 audit that we tried to capitalise too many personnel costs through IT projects and bits and pieces. In fact, we got told, I think, we had to reverse 1.3 or 1.13 million of those. Personnel costs feel to me like they are far higher than they should be. In the November report, they were already 20% above what had been budgeted. And if we look at the December update, they're 16% higher than where they should be. Some of the rationale that's been provided for that is, if you look on page 17, it talks about personnel costs slightly over budget. I call 16% a lot more than slightly over budget, due to planned reductions in staffing not yet realised. I'd like to understand that further, and to reduce recoveries from capital works. And again, that goes to the heart of the question that you raised. In the budget for 2026, 2027, we have a significant amount of personnel costs that are proposed to be capitalised. We've had an audit report from 25-26 that's already told us that we tried to do that too much last year. And so I'm really interested in understanding what the risk is this year of those costs that we're talking about being capitalised, not being able to be capitalised. Sorry, that was a long-winded kind of reinforcement of your question. Amanda, Paul, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so when we had that audit advice that we couldn't capitalise the full extent of specifically the intangible assets, when people working on intangible assets, when that asset is complete and results in an asset, we were capitalising that time instead of expensing it. It was added to the value of the asset. So in terms of some timing differences here, we don't do that exercise until the asset is complete. So it will sit in expenditure until we get to such time as when we put the asset on the balance sheet, then all the costs associated will sort all that out at that time. So payroll can sit higher throughout the year, and then we do a bit of a wash up at the end when we start to capitalise all those assets. But in terms of the budget, it will be higher because we didn't get that audit advice until after we'd already set the 26 budget. So in the long-term plan, we had expected to capitalise about $2.5–3 million worth of payroll costs, largely to do with the significant program of IT work that we have ongoing at the moment. And then there's quite a lot of the project management office. A lot of their time is directly put into working on assets, building assets, so that time can be capitalised. Yeah, so there's a lot of work to do. It happens more at the end of the year when those assets are finished. So you can see if our capital, that last point that I made, the capital is behind, the assets haven't been capitalised as planned. So those costs won't get capitalised until a bit later as well.
Mel.
Just sort of following up for that, and I guess it's the crux of concern is how we keep an eye on this personnel cost, which is obviously in the community is probably quite a high profile kind of conversation as well. Is when we are looking at capitalising staff time and we're already sitting over budget, how do we as governance get a real feel for what the personnel costs are and how we are working on managing them? I guess that's the conversation we're probably struggling to really understand, is how we get a good understanding of it and how we kind of start to question that when it gets a little bit confused as to how we follow the spend. Yes.
Yeah, so it's probably something that we need to have more oversight on, because when we budgeted it, it was kind of a proportion of, like say the IT projects, you know, it might be 20% of the staff time could be capitalised. So it's quite a bit rough, but maybe we could do a bit more work on the specific projects and we can identify exactly when we think they'll be completed throughout the year, and that cost can then be moved to the balance sheet. But for right now, I think the best place is to see the cold hard cash that we're paying our staff is sitting in payroll costs, and it is an expense. So worst case scenario, that is what your payroll costs are going to be. And we will try as hard as we can to capitalise all that we can, but there could be quite a bit of pushback from Audit New Zealand this year.
Yeah. Thanks, Amanda. Look, it's 10 past 9. I'll just note that Councillor Hopkins has joined us. Welcome. Good to see you. I think that, to Mel's point, that would be a really useful thing for us to do. I know, Amanda, in previous PARs, we've had that breakdown of personnel costs that are proposed to be CapEx or not, but we've had a pretty clear directive from Audit New Zealand that some of the IT projects, like the digitalisation projects that we suggested, that we attempted to CapEx previously, we've been told quite clearly that that's not to be the case. And so I do feel there's a piece of work that we could be doing to understand what personnel costs are being CapExed to what projects, and then kind of run the litmus test, even perhaps with Audit New Zealand ahead of time, or to understand what there's a significant risk here that personnel costs will remain above budget, to your point, for the remainder of the year. That's something that the community's, you know, pretty focused on. There's also that comment in the report about one of the other reasons that they're high is because we haven't realised some of the reductions in staff that we were expecting to see, and it would be good to understand why that hasn't happened either. So I think it's an important piece of discussion for us to remain focused on, and it would be great if at the next PAR we could see that allocation of personnel costs to capitalised projects. Sorry, is there further discussion? Question? Yep, Paul.
This probably getting a bit more into the fundamentals of essentially how council budgets and operates. So I think we're at the moment where we're using the term personnel cost and reporting it in the way that we are required to in the annual report is actually in conflict with the way you're wanting to manage it. So even if it's personnel versus payroll costs, so the total payroll cost is not 20% over what we were expecting, nothing like that. So, but then this capitalisation issue comes in, and so there is a variance in reporting. So we need to work out, look at ways that we can more clearly talk about the entire payroll cost and how that compares to what we were expecting. The other, why we've used this approach in terms of capitalising staff costs is essentially about funding. If it's not capitalised, the way we've done this is it's simpler to capitalise it. That is loan funded. So if you're creating an asset, the full cost of creating that asset, and the basic approach is that it's loan funded rather than rates funded. If council wants to take the position, no, we want to rate fund all of the personnel costs and not include them in a project, you're going to see a significant increase in the rate requirement in the years that you want to do that, because we're not spreading that cost over the life of the asset. I mean, this is, to give the simplistic example, it's like if you're building a house, it's not the cost of materials that you consider the cost of building the house, it's all of the time and effort of the various trades that go into it. So our officer time is just as valuable in creating an asset as a consultant's time or an engineer's time. If we went out and used a third party to provide all those services, there wouldn't be any debate about those costs being capitalised into the asset. Instead, the direction of council has been to try and use officer time wherever possible and instead of third party time, because it's more cost effective in many cases. So I'm saying there's some, I suppose, more fundamental issues that this reporting is highlighting, that we, not so much for this annual plan, but certainly for the long-term plan, that we'll need to all get on the same page about how we want these to be treated, because they will be fundamental to how we set a lot of the budgets. And lastly, look, audit is applying an accounting standard that is designed essentially for other entities. Council can decide so actually we want to present it in a way that is appropriate for our community to understand, and that we believe reflects. It actually takes time to create these IT software systems assets, and that's only going to increase as we go from very hard systems to more software as a service. So you're not buying this, you're not paying $1 million to buy something, you're paying an annual subscription fee and using it. So we're going to have a discussion about how we treat those, but the decision should be yours, and then you deal with the audit consultant, not decided by audit, who then makes a decision for you.
Yeah, look, and I'm not suggesting for a minute.
I'm not saying that, but I think there's some fundamental discussions we need to have about with you about how you want these to be treated in your reports. Your reports, not.
And I think that a good place for that to start would be by seeing a decent breakdown of where that sits and where that works, because I appreciate that if you're going to loan fund something, then that's a good way of doing it. But if Bob's working on something, whether we pay for it out of a loan or whether we pay for it out of personnel costs, as a community, we're still paying for it.
Agree completely that at the moment we're trying to use one number to try and address two different things, and that's and we've noted it's not to the satisfaction of the committee, so we'll come up with something else.
Thank you. Mel, did you have something?
I guess just to say that, thank you, that explains it really well. I think that we don't want to look at how we fund it differently, because I think if there's a project cost, it needs to be recognised as such. But if, outside of that, if through our information we receive through the park committee, if we can get an understanding of what we're also spending in that payroll space as a separate piece of information, I think that's helpful as well for discussions.
John.
Thank you for that, Paul. I'm just a bit curious though. Are we not actually charging ourselves for providing our own service? Those people are on our payroll, and then we turn around and charge them back to the asset.
It's how you want to fund it. Do you want it funded through a loan that spreads the cost over a number of years, or do you want to fund it through rates where it's, the cost impact is all in that 1 year? So that's the discussion I'm saying we need to have, so that you are all comfortable with that approach and that we're consistent, particularly in developing the long-term plan, because it will have, can have a significant impact on the rates that you're requiring in any 1 year, particularly as we get into delivering. We're delivering 3 very large projects this year. We'll still have an ambitious capital program over the next few years. There is significant officer time and effort in creating those assets, and that should be funded in a way that you're all comfortable with.
But I get, John, was your question not more if you're working for the council and you're getting paid $100 a year, but 40% of your time is going to a project that's being capitalised? Are we confident that the council's not paying the $100 a year for you, and we're borrowing $40 a year of capitalised money for you? And I think, Amanda, the answer to that is no, because of the way that you apportion the way that you apportion that $100, you'd take the 40 out and put it into the other side. So there's not,
Yep.
there's not double dipping
And that,
going on there.
and that's what's creating the big variance that you're seeing, that we've got this lag between what you've decided on
Yeah.
how someone should be paid for, thanks, on how someone should be paid for and how they're currently being paid for at the moment.
Look,
Perfect, thank you.
obviously pretty important topic to all of us, and we'd love to see more clarity. And to your point, Paul, it goes to the heart of how we fund things. So I think this is a really positive discussion for us to have at the start of the triennium, especially as we start to go
Yep.
into the annual planning, because it's going to become increasingly more important. Amanda, I guess the other kind of overarching theme that I take from the financial report so far is that revenue's quite a bit behind budget, but that feels like it's a timing thing and it should rectify itself primarily through the allocation of the grants and subsidies. It's the expenses that we should be more concerned about at this stage, because we expect that the revenue will, to a large degree, right itself.
Yeah, well, the expenditure, what was the figure? It was just over $1 million as at 31 December, slightly over $1 million over budget. So all things considered, like depreciation is higher, it's about 300K higher because our valuations were higher than we expected. So there's nothing we can do about that. And then we've discussed the personnel costs. So, and you've got inflation rates changing and things like that. So I think all in all, like it's pretty reasonable in terms of expenditure. And then the grants, we're working, I had a meeting just yesterday as well about the Event Centre Trust, just to fine tune exactly when we can expect those last donations. A big chunk should come in the next month. And then there's the Forester Gallery final payments for those and things as well. So that should all right itself by 30 June. There is still going to be some event centre grants that are going to be paid over the long term. A couple of them out 10 years. And so, yeah, our budget, when we set the next year's budget, we're going to have to think about these sort of things and try and set the budget as accurately as possible for all these known sort of changes. So revenue will be behind somewhat as at 30 June 26. But yeah, I think expenditure, if we can keep an eye on these personnel costs, try and capitalise as much as we can. Depreciation is what it is. And then just try and keep a tight rein on top of other operating costs. Like you can see that table there with contractor spend is quite reasonable. It's actually under budget at the moment.
Training and travel 38% over budget for the year so far, 75% of the full year already. But I mean, it's a relatively small number, but still sticks out. But before I ask any further questions, are there other questions for 5.1, 5.2, the November end and the quarter end? Sure, John.
So that's on page 18 and it lists the total current assets. Loans to other entities is down to 6.1 mil, I think. Is that the way I read it? I thought we had more in that. Oh, that's okay.
There's two portions for loans to other entities. There's a non-current portion of 19,845. And then the amount that we're supposed to expecting to receive this year is the 617 in current.
Okay, thank you.
You do raise a good point though, which I just questioned Amanda about before. I was going to follow up on, but if we look on page 14, it has loans to other entities being around about $2.5 million over budget. So that's 20.58 million versus 18 million. There's a note down there, note 2, to look at the quarterly treasury report. And when we look at that, it's actually only about 600,000 over. So Amanda's going to investigate what the difference is in there, but we should be sitting around 19. We've paid back $1 million of the Waitaki District Health Services debt in January, and we intend to pay back another 500,000 of that this month as well. So the loans to other entities is certainly reducing. We had budgeted on that Waitaki District Health Services stuff coming back in though. No. So we should see the loans to other entities being lower than budgeted rather than higher than budgeted. I guess the one other thing that stood out for me in the report was that water CapEx being significantly under budget already for the year. And there's a forecast that I think it talks in here that early indications are that $10 million of water's capital work might be deferred until the next financial year. So again, I guess, that looks like we didn't achieve what we were intending to last year. We're already well under this year. It feels like we might be overestimating our ability to deliver some of these water capex projects. And again, something we should look to take into consideration as part of the annual planning for this year. Now, sorry.
I was going to say the annual planning for this year and conversations on water will probably change the whole ball game.
Yeah.
So it'll be an interesting conversation, but whether it's on council's books is probably another conversation for another day after a decision we make in the near future.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim.
These delays with the water. These delays with the water, I noticed the explanation that the capital projects are in the scoping phase. So are we talking about internal capacity or contractor ability to deliver, or are the delays the result of design and other considerations of that nature that have perhaps pushed the start date back?
Thank you. I'll give that to Paul to maybe speak to briefly.
Yeah, and then Mr. Cook may want to chip in as well. There was a procurement paper presented to council. So it's actually a combination of all of those three factors that you mentioned, Councillor Hopkins. So one was a big part has been a review of the procurement approach and the technical approaches that we're actually going to take to some of these projects. So recognised that council had, I suppose particularly Councillor McCone, had concerned about the price being attached to some of the water upgrades. So the team took that on board and has been investigating options. And I think now they have identified a way to address some of those problems that will probably make Councillor McCone far happier in terms of the price and approach. So some of those, it may not be underspend. It's actually, we have just found a more cost-effective way of delivering it. So that was $4 million of the water upgrades and I think the 4 Corridale schemes and 1 Wahino scheme. So that's been a big piece of work. The other was changing the procurement approach. So trying to group some of these contracts and projects together and looking at combining a number of years into a single procurement process. That's taken a bit of a while, but that was approved by council and that's currently out to tender at the moment. So that would give, it may mean a slightly reduced spend in the current year, but real certainty in the next 3 years after that. So the delivery mechanism will actually be put in place. And the last one, it's just, focusing on those 2 big pieces of work. Some of the smaller ones have been deferred and will be sort of a focus in the next 6 months. But it was really, looking at those big projects to make sure that the design is right, the approach is right, and the procurement system is right to generate the most cost-effective solution, which is something that I think we've all agreed is, given the size of the budgets that we're talking about, a bit more work at this initial stage has already shown that it's, I think, going to generate better outcomes than the sort of solutions that were initially assessed to get the work underway. So I think, that was in the procurement report. I think it'll be something that will be reported in more detail into the forgotten was the Assets Committee or Assets and Other Things Committee, whatever it's called. But it certainly was in a bit more detail in that procurement report about how this change of approach is trying to produce better value.
Thank you. John, you had a follow-up?
That solves everything, Paul. Thank you for that. I just have one more question, if I may, on page 20. It's a summary of the capital expenditure. I presume property that's part of the event centre, is it? On its total, and parks being way over, I presume that's also the event centre, is it? I also wonder, is IT finally finished spending, or where are we at on some of those pages?
Thank you. So you mentioned property being 4.1, plays 2.7, but you said parks well over. It looks to me like parks are pretty much bang on.
Yeah, but what I'm getting at is the full year budget last year was 17.5 million. I presume a fair chunk of that is the event centre, and therefore that number may reduce down to 2.5 million per annum next year.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, so Parks is principally the event centre. It was about 15 million last year and 15 million this year, which is the full cost of the project. Just bear in mind that council's only paying for half of that, and the grants and funding from the trust covers the other half. But we recognise the full cost. So yeah, there's 9 million odd in Parks there is sitting on track with budget. We're pretty much on track with budget for the event centre at the moment. And then in property, that 4 million is the Forester Gallery extension, pretty much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just following up on your comment around the deferral of some of the water capex and the water spend, I just thought we should touch briefly on the what we expect our lending to be at year end, and so we've got 19 million rolling over. In the course of the next month or so, we expect to roll that, but at this stage, you'd be forecasting that our borrowings would be under budget at year end.
I was going to talk about that more in the Treasury report, but
Okay, well, we can defer that till then. Are there any further questions on agenda item 5.1, the report to 30 November? If not, could I ask somebody to move that we accept that? Moved by Councillor McCone, seconded by Councillor Lewis. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. That's carried. And I'll, sorry.
Just before we move off the item, so we talked about a couple of things. So can we just, I suppose, clarify the committee's expectation about what they're wanting to see? So that it's almost easiest to do this by as a resolution, so it populates into the sort of the follow-up list that we're working on. So I mean, we talked about payroll, a more specific payroll report for the next meeting, and then a discussion about, I suppose, the funding approach for capital assets. So
yeah, so I would like to see a payroll report for the next meeting at 31 March that provides us with a breakdown of the allocation of personnel costs that are being capexed to the specific projects that they're being capexed to. The discussion around funding, I'm open to when the best time for that discussion would be to be had. I feel we'd benefit from being able to see that breakdown of costs before we then went into the discussion around funding. And I feel like the discussion around funding might be something that we want to do ahead of the annual planning process when we've got a better handle on where we're at. So I'm open to suggestions from other committee members, but I think that breakdown of payroll would be a great first step for the next part. Sorry, Jim.
Speaking specifically of the issue of allocating some time and money to projects rather than wages.
Yes, that's exactly what we're talking
Right.
to. So that was the discussion that we had
And
earlier.
what I think you said before, if I'm correct, or if I correctly interpreted you, was that Audit don't like it, but you believe we're entitled to do it if we wish.
Well, I think to Paul's point before, I mean, Audit made it clear in their audit report last year that they didn't like some of the way that we were allocating things, but we're not going to have what we do at this level determined by Audit. So the rationale for looking at this is not we're a bit worried that Audit might not be happy with what we're doing. The rationale for us doing this is we'd like to understand better how costs are being allocated, specifically costs of our core staff. Yeah, sorry. So could I move that we do accept that payroll report? Thank you. Moved by Councillor, seconded by Franz. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's carried. Thank you for that, helping clarify that, Paul. So if we could now move on, I'd like to move that we receive and accept agenda item 5.2, the quarterly report. Moved by Sven, seconded by Mel. All those in favour? Against? Thank you again, that's carried. And so we'll now move, Amanda, into agenda item 5.3, the Treasury report for Q2.
Okay, so the main things I wanted to point out here were our cash holdings and a bit of a discussion around our borrowing level. So in terms of cash, you'll note it was sitting higher than we typically intend at 7.9 at 31 December. That is simply because of our Christmas shutdown. We go away for 10 days and we had some debt due to roll over in middle of January. And I thought it was safer to get it ahead of Christmas so that it was in the bank in case we needed it. LGFA shut down until I think the 16th of January, so it was just a safer call to get it in there. So that is why we are cash high at 31 December. It's not ideal. At mid-January would have been fine. It's just for that Christmas shutdown. And then so in terms of borrowing, that meant our borrowing has lifted up to 90.9 as well, which is getting close to our end of year budget around 93 mil. So we've also had some debt roll over yesterday to 5 million. We've just reborrowed it, it matured and re-borrowed. Another 10 mil is going to happen the same next month. And looking forward, I have to do another check again at how much of our capital projects are going to be carried forward into the 27 financial year to know exactly how much borrowing we're going to need before 30 June. But I'm thinking it's going to be pretty close to our expectation of 93 mil. We've got rates coming in by the 25th of this month, and then another lot will come before 25th of May. So we should be tracking pretty good with that good cash holding that we've got right now. And then in terms, I guess the other thing I wanted to point out, our liquidity ratio, it's okay at 31 December because of that significant cash holding, but because of our new strategy of keeping our cash low and repaying debt, our liquidity ratio is always quite close to the line. So the liquidity ratio is you have to have more than 110% of so like your loans that you've drawn down, you basically have to have another 10% worth of that held in cash or like readily available lines of credit and that sort of thing. So that's where we have our CAL facility, which is currently 6 million. So it just sits there and I hardly ever draw down on it. The main time I borrow from that is when we pay our creditors on the 20th of the month. So like we might get to the 20th of February, need to pay our creditors, borrow for those 5 days until the rates all come in on the 25th. So it's very, very short-term borrowing. And a lot of the time it just sits there undrawn.
Sorry, Amanda, just so if you could just explain, give an example of that liquidity ratio really simply for the committee so that they can understand exactly what it means. If I'm borrowing $100 million, how much cash, and really importantly, the liquidity ratio is not something that we make up internally. It's an LGFA requirement. So if you want to borrow money from the LGFA, you've got to have a liquidity ratio of 110%. But so if I was wanting to borrow $100 million, I've got to have how much cash or ready availability to cash?
Yeah, so another 10%. So you need to have another 10 million. So if we're sitting at 90 now, thinking that we're going to get to 93 by the end of the year, I think it would be healthy for us to have an extra 10 million on hold. The 6 million has been appropriate until this point, but I think we'd be a lot safer if we increase that.
Yes. And so in the olden days, they used to have quite a bit of cash sort of sitting around in the slush fund to make sure that we could cover those things. When I came in, I was really clear that we wanted to kind of tighten up our cash position as much as possible. And Amanda and Paul have done a great job of that. I see no sense in borrowing money when you've got cash in the bank. It's just not the way we'd run our households. It's not the way we should be running our council. And so Amanda and Paul have got to a point where they've got a really, really tight rein on the amount of cash that we've got in the bank. The result of that is that it sometimes pushes us really close to that liquidity ratio. And when it pushes us quite close to that liquidity ratio, there's a risk that we may not be able to borrow the money that we need. One of the ways that we can deal with this is that we've got this bank facility called the CAL facility, which is basically an overdraft facility that we can use for short term when we need to. But importantly, we all know through our own businesses and our own lives that overdrafts don't come free. So there's a cost associated with this. The cost is not significant though, Amanda, compared with the benefit that we get from the tighter management of our cash. So Amanda's proposal is that we lift that overdraft facility from 6 million to 10 million. We're not intending that we use that particularly more often. I think having the facility in place costs us something like 18,000 a month. For the 6 million, it might cost us 20,000 a month to go to 10, and then you just pay when you use it. John, you're looking concerned about that.
That's right.
18,000 seems like, so it sounds like a lot of money, but when you're talking about having access to potentially $10 million of short-term funding, and you work the numbers, it's pretty tight.
So if that is Amanda's recommendation, why isn't it in the report?
I don't think it needs to come. It's not something that needs to come to the par for resolution. It's something that that is delegated to Paul and Amanda to be able to do. It's not talking about increasing our debt. It's just talking about using a facility more. So it was really just brought to the council's attention, to the committee's attention, more for socialisation than for approval.
Well, at the risk of being pedantic, it is increasing our debt because the cost of going from 6 to 10 is, as you have indicated, an additional amount of money per month.
We're not talking about going from 6 to 10 in terms of debt increasing. We're talking about using an overdraft facility for short periods of time to be able to cover cash flow shortfalls.
But if I heard you correctly, you said that we're paying, is it 18 or 6?
Well, that's just a fee to be able to
Yes.
use a facility.
So technically, I mean, as I said, at the risk of being pedantic, we actually are increasing our debt, although to a very, very, very minuscule amount.
Look, I think that this is something that we could probably talk to more offline so that I can explain it better. I don't consider that it's increasing our debt. I consider that it's using a facility to be able to manage our cash flows, and that may be pedantic. And if you think that it is, then we can speak to it offline. But it's absolutely within the delegated authorization that the executive team have to run our treasury function, and it was more being brought here just to discuss how we were going to manage our cash flows going forward. It's fine. We don't need to accuse anybody of pedantry, Councillor Hopkins. Please don't put yourself in that boat either. Franz, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Basically, just checking there is no restrictions. Excuse me. There's no restrictions on using that facility. So if we get an emergency event and we need cash on hand, we can actually use that. The other question I had, it does go towards our credit rating though, doesn't it? Because it is a liability.
Yeah, so that's true to both points. It's readily available. That's why I wanted to have it all cash available when we're shut down for those 10 days over Christmas. It's good to have some sort of availability like that. Readily available whenever you want to. I can draw it down on the day. I think I've got till maybe 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I can draw down. And yes, it does count. It is drawn down debt at that time, but we would only hold it very temporarily.
So just we put a clarification. We don't actually have a credit rating. We don't have a formal credit rating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's something that council will need to contemplate, but yeah, we don't have one at the moment because until we pretty much got to a position that we are now in terms of the debt, it wasn't financially justified, because there is an annual cost to having one. And
a significant staffing cost
to
achieving it.
So it will be something we'll follow on from the decision that the mayor talked about earlier.
Okay. Any other questions on the Treasury report? Dan?
Just a quick question with regards to the interest on the deposits. I notice it's well back on the budget, but that's largely due, as I understand it, to the change in interest rates coming back this way. Is there a plan to actually revise that going forward and I don't know, is it more realistic, a more realistic number? So we're not actually counting that as a potential stream of income.
So what so the interest rates are, this agreements in place, and most of them are set on like either our average rate of borrowing, so what our average rate of all of our loans with LGFA, and then we have a markup.
No, actually, I was meaning actually interest on bank deposits. So there was a figure there of 14,000 versus a budget of 65,000. And my reading on that was that that was money that we had invested in short-term deposits. But with the reduction in interest rates, that's actually reduced the amount of return that we would get from that, which, again, as I say, just as far as the budget's concerned, as interest rates appear to be going that way, a revision on that. So we're not expecting that to be in the budget and the balance sheet.
Yep, so we won't include that in the budget going forward in 2027. We don't actually change the 26 budget throughout the year. We're stuck with it now. But yeah, and we'll always be behind in budget. So we had expected to have a bit more cash on hand and in term deposit, and it's just not the case. It's just not worth it at this point in time with these interest rates. So yeah, we're going to be significantly under budget all year in terms of that, but we'll definitely going forward, I presume, in the next annual plan budget and the long-term plan, we will most likely keep to this strategy to all cash will be going towards paying down debt, and we won't have much earnings from interest cash on hand.
Yeah, I think that's and that's again a really useful thing for us to think about as we start to go into that annual planning phase, right? In a low interest environment and a high debt environment, I think planning on making money off deposits is not a particularly smart move, and so we should be budgeting on, if not nothing, then certainly immaterial. But we have what we have for the budget for this year. But it's a great point, Sven.
On page 30 in the policy compliance box there's one little red flag with the funding maturity profile not being within policy control limits. I was just wondering what that was referring to, and whether that refers to our policy or an external policy of some sort.
Yep, so that's another threshold that is set by LGFA and we mirror internally. So that was, I should have mentioned that before, that was because of my decision to borrow the cash, draw down before Christmas, as opposed to in this financial year. So it's just got it out of the wrong bucket. But yeah, that was just for that reason of having that cash on hand at Christmas.
And it's a point in time red flag too, rather than an annual red flag. So, John.
Right, just go back a couple of pages to the page 27. It's the last page of the last report, and it's got itemised there departmental borrowing, which is pretty straightforward, really. Yeah, so if Waters goes through, we're going to be looking at a $40 million debt on today's figures, roughly. But it does go on to say the remaining 22 million is split equally between solid waste, parks and recreation, and other borrowing. And again, it mentions digital services. Again, have we finished spending with digital services, or where is this going? What's it all for?
Is it a Paul question?
Yeah, sure.
I'd noted that too, Councillor McCone. I'd said, can we please get a breakdown on this? So $22 million is a big number. It would be nice to understand what it was broken down into, and to your point, whether we thought that it was going to be similar to that going forward.
I think we'll roll that digital services discussion into the discussion about capitalising cost, because that's a part of it. But I'm sorry to disappoint you, Councillor McCone. The investment into digital services will be ongoing, and it will be significant if you want council to operate as a relatively modern organisation.
And that is absolutely not a discussion for the park committee. So we'll acknowledge that, and we'll have that discussion at a later point.
In terms of the breakdown, you can, so it's recognising the projects that we've spent in the last few years that have been approved by council in annual plans and long-term plans. So Project Reclaim being a third of it, which we're all aware of, that was loan funded. And the Parks and Recreation, so that's your Forester Gallery and things like that. And the other borrowing, digital services, like that's just an example, etc. But digital services is the most significant one, and you'll remember that over the last few years there has been a significant program of work that has been approved by council in the budgets.
All righty. Thank you. Just following up on Sven's question before, Amanda and Paul, I had one other question. If I look on page 31, we have the interest rate risk management, and we have the two graphs side by side. The left graph being the gross debt position, and then the graph on the right taking into account the on lending to NOIC. This might be a really silly technical question, but why do we only subtract NOIC off there and not the likes of Kurau, Waitaki District, etc.?
NOIC is the most significant one. So this is just as a bit of an idea as well. Like, we haven't actually formally checked this with the LGFA to take off our loans from other entities, but NOIC is an assured one with guaranteed returns at set times per contract. And some of the other ones are we have less certain repayments.
Okay. Okay, I get that now. Yeah, I mean, and I think that it's a good test if we're looking at what our buckets look like in terms of interest rate risk management. We should be able to subtract off those that we've on lent, that we've got nice guaranteed kind of bucket returns back on. So, thank you. That answers that question. Are there any further questions on the Treasury strategy? I'm conscious of time and not wanting to hold things up. If not, could I ask somebody to move that we please accept the Treasury strategy? Moved by Sven, seconded by Dan. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. That's carried. And we'll now move on to what I know is the most exciting agenda item on the par today. Agenda item 5.4, Audit New Zealand findings.
I could just start before Amanda goes through the details. So I suppose just to be, what we would like your feedback on from this report is, Amanda and the team have gone through and highlighted what they believe an appropriate response from council is to the items that Audit New Zealand has highlighted. We just want you to be comfortable with that response. This is sort of for us, it's a risk reward return sort of discussion. It's like, some of these things, yes, they're there, but we don't believe they're a major item. Other ones, we believe that they do require sort of a significant response. It's really you being comfortable with the response we're proposing, because some of these things will just keep recurring. But if you're comfortable with it, then that's the action we're going to take. So, sorry, over to you, Amanda, just to talk through some of the detailed responses.
Well, if I could just follow up on that. Sorry, Amanda, just super quickly, right? If we look at the audit findings, there were 3 audit findings that came through this year that had a high rating associated with them. There's other findings that were medium. There's other findings from previous years that they still carry on, where they say, we'd like you to pick up on this. And we go, well, that's great, but actually we're not going to, because it's not significant enough. But of those 3 audit findings that were rated high in this order, we've already had a really good chat about 2 of them, being the way that we put intangible assets across and the way that we capitalise the IT costs of some of those intangibles. The other one that's standing out is that there's an issue with the payroll system. So we adopted a new payroll system last year, and some of the issues associated with that are around unresolved issues around the accuracy of leave balances. To me, that's actually a really important one for us to sort out pretty quickly. Staff care about leave, and staff care about their leave balances a lot, and it's important that they're able to do that. So the standout for me and all these ones is that we talk here about being working on this as a matter of urgency and resolving as a matter of urgency. The audit report came to us on the 5th of December. I appreciate that there's been a bit of a break in between, but for me, the standout is what's urgency mean in terms of resolving those payroll issues, because that's something that our people really care about, and that's something that I care about more than what Audit New Zealand cares about.
Okay, so the audit director came and spoke to the council when we adopted the annual report on 9th of December, and a lot of these messages he did say at the time, and that report to council was provided on the 5th of December. This has been the first opportunity to really talk about it. And also there's a separate report there to management, which is a bit more of the nitty-gritty operational issues they found underneath. So there's a lot of detail here. I've tried to explain it as best I can. Feel free to ask me any more detail you need to understand the specific matter, but I think the main point I wanted to make is what we're doing about it. So I guess scrolling right to the bottom, the conclusion, there's bullet points there about what we're going to do about those big ticket items that Simon's just talked about. The payroll system, we are in the process of undertaking a review of the payroll processes and controls. It suggests a bit more oversight by finance, so just working with the people and capability team to work out who's how that slots in. Payroll balances, they are working on the leave balances as time allows. Intangible assets we've talked about, and we will continue to talk about. The paper will come back to PAR next month, itemising per project. Property, plant and equipment and intangible assets, the quality and timeliness of accounting processes. It's something that we've always, it's kind of, you know, like our capital projects, we're a bit delayed at the moment, and we won't really know the full extent of it until they're all capitalised at the end of the year. It's a process that I want to get going a bit more structured throughout the year. So we have a consultant working at the moment in that area, trying to tidy up some processes and some forms and things so that we can get clearer instruction from the departments when a project's completed. Finance gets told, it gets capitalised, and we are more onto it throughout the year. Receivables, expected credit losses, we can do the calculation in terms of the matrix that Audit New Zealand wants, but I think it'll come out with pretty much the same result, and it's a very immaterial figure. Sensitive expenditure policy and the fraud policy is underway, and training will be provided organisation-wide for those. And then this one about the variance between invoice and purchase order amounts. So basically, when someone wants to spend something at council in line with their budget, they request a purchase order, and there's one-up approvals and things, and it's all in the system. And then when the invoice actually comes in, if that invoice is out, it's what tolerance we want to put that difference, what level we want to put it at. So the auditors have raised this previously, and our system couldn't actually change the percentage, or they were wanting dollar amounts, and we couldn't do that. But I'd like to suggest that we decrease the tolerance to 5%. It's currently 15%. And then it's going to be a bit of extra administration, because it's going to flag when someone gets a 5% threshold, over a 5% threshold now. They'll have to put a reason for why their invoice is higher than what they originally thought. Whereas the 15% threshold right now wouldn't create as much administration. So yeah, I was going to suggest that we do that. And then that, although it doesn't answer exactly what Audit New Zealand want, they want the dollar value, it still decreases the threshold quite significantly anyway.
Thank you. I think that's a very sensible approach to take, and I'm comfortable with the proposals. I'll just open it up for discussion on the floor. Councillor Hopkins.
I've got 3 questions. I don't want you to outline these identified deficiencies in the new payroll process, but are you guys satisfied that we have moved quickly enough and effectively enough to reduce or prevent the increased risk of fraud? A couple of questions further on down.
Should we deal with the first one first?
Okay, all right.
Should we deal with the first one first? I think, so I've highlighted my concern with some of the stuff that they've called out about audits. The audit's called out about payroll. So there's the issue around leave. There's the issue around the controls not being in place properly for fraud. We've mentioned that we're going to be working on that as quickly as possible. I'd be pretty disappointed if we didn't have a solution for that by the next PAR meeting, if we didn't see that off the calendar. Amanda, do you think that that's an achievable goal?
What would you like back? Like a full breakdown of how the system works in the.
No, not at all. I don't think we need that level of detail whatsoever. I'd just like to have confidence at the next PAR meeting that the audit finding around payroll, both with regard to the controls around fraud and the issues around the leave balances, I'd just like for us to be comfortable that they were being dealt with and had been dealt with.
It sits with people and capability, so I can't speak to their timeframes of when they're working
No,
on it.
of course.
But as far as, so that's for the leave side of it. As far as the payroll system, I have, as soon as this report, as soon as I receive this report, I've been involved in that process already, making improvements in that process. And I have got assurance from the people and capability manager that there is controls in place and there is no risk of fraud. We have completely changed from having an in-house payroll person to a separate entity performing that duty now. So there is the independence and controls there. It's just the documentation of that and the fact that Audit has suggested that a step also involves finance. So there's another review of those sorts of any changes that happen with this independent entity, the independent payroll provider, that we are checking those as well.
Thank you. So that answers that question. Jim, your second question?
Curious to know why Audit took the view under capitalisation of IT related and digitisation costs. They're disagreeing with our treatment of capitalising 1.113 million of IT related costs. They feel they should have been expensed because, amongst other things, council will not receive future economic benefits or service potential. But that's precisely the argument that we've been given by IT from go to woe as to why it's being done.
Absolutely, and we had quite an extensive discussion. I think it might have been just before you arrived or when you arrived, but we've talked about that. And that was part of our discussion around the personnel costs and the breakdown of personnel costs and the capitalisation of them. So we're aware that Audit's having a pretty good look at what we're doing and why we're doing it. We're not agreeing with their outcomes, and we're not going to let their recommendations or their findings change the way that we go about things unless we have to. But I guess that's why we're making this a really important part of our conversations going forward, and why we've asked for what the breakdown that we want for the next one. And then there'll be that latter discussion around funding. So I think that we've discussed that point quite a lot, and we certainly recognise it. Sorry, you had a question?
Yeah, the third.
Sorry, no, just one moment. Jim will let John have it. Oh, you got a quick third?
Yeah, the third one was under capitalisation of property, plant and equipment. I'm just curious to know, and Amanda or Paul might wish to expand upon this. There's an interesting little paragraph. However, Audit New Zealand requested further highly detailed transaction level information and no longer access the financial system themselves to check ledger listings and invoices. This significantly impacted on the value and efficiency of the audit process. What I'm interested in is, do you guys have an estimate of the cost to us of what appear to be possibly capricious decisions by them?
So this goes to the heart of the relationship that we had with Audit last year, the massive audit costs that we incurred, and that doesn't take into your point, that doesn't take into account any of the time that Amanda and the team spent on having to go down, could only rabbit holes to try and uncover information. And we absolutely have to make sure that we are more efficient on both sides with that process this year. But hang on a minute, I'll hand it over to Amanda to just answer your question first.
I think we will probably have this conversation with Audit New Zealand shortly. I think they've indicated that they're going to be seeking overruns. They feel that the time and cost overruns is due to our performance. But yeah, as I've pointed out here, that there was a change in their approach in the past where they have had access to the system. They could search any code they want. They could delve down into invoices, anything they wanted. It changed completely this year, and it was a lot of extra time cost on us. I cannot estimate that. We didn't keep a record of it. But yeah, that's something that we need to work through with Audit New Zealand.
And I will absolutely be a part of that conversation. You know how passionate I am about audit costs and some of the comments that I've made in the past. So I just know that Amanda and the team spent a huge amount of time on what you would argue was not particularly great value add, and we don't want that, and we don't want another $400,000 audit bill this year. So you had a question, Jim. John.
Bit of a statement and a question. Sorry. Yeah, look, I take on board with the audit department, and I'm reading through this. I think a lot of this is academic as opposed to practical on the ground stuff. And I think the things that have been pointed out, for want of a better way of putting it, some of it's quite pedantic, and a lot of what we're being told to change, actually, they need to look at their own back door too. Some of the stuff that they've been asking for, they haven't done it in a timely fashion either. So I think there's things on both sides to look at, but that's just my personal opinion. Their charging is also could be relative to what they're doing. But anyway, we'll leave that aside. But the two things that keep coming up is the payroll and the variance between the invoice and PO amounts, which you've explained. Has there been a cost analysis done between actually doing the payroll in-house as opposed to outside sourcing it?
Yeah, yes, there was. I mean, and that was the reason that we've gone to a third party provider, because it is more cost effective.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, that exercise was gone through. It was considered by senior management team, and a decision made to go external.
And there's just a few bits and pieces that we tied up. And I take on board your point around a lot of it being pretended, but there's also some really good stuff that does come out of the audit process that we do need to pick up on, and we do need to lift our game on. And so I think there's some really beneficial stuff in here too. Sven, you had a question?
Yeah, just regarding the overrun that they might be seeking. Is there a clause in the contract we've got with them that allows them to do that, or is it just they're just chancing their hand type thing?
So yes, there is a clause in the contract, but they actually have to apply to the Office of the Auditor General, and so the discussion is mainly between the Office of the Auditor General and the audit supplier about why there's a cost overrun. So that's where it occurs. It should be a three-way conversation, but it's actually just them with the AOG, and then they come and see us and say, "Oh, well, this has been approved, so you need to pay it." So it's not. It's a far from an ideal process.
Yeah, it's a conversation between the oversight committee and the entity that's been approved by the oversight committee to come out. It's just not pretty, Sven, and it's something that we will absolutely, argue as much as we can, because you look at the costs associated with. Oh, well, we'll look at that later in public. It's just prohibitive, but let's not get wound up on it. I am conscious of time. Are there any more points of discussion around the audit findings and the proposed treatment of them?
So it's on page 48, and it goes back to the intangible assets that we mentioned before in software. Is there a process in place for that? Because that's one thing they have highlighted.
Yeah, that's the one we talked about, and well, I think we need to have the discussion. I mean, so I'm just going to. Why it is a concern is that in a for-profit entity, this is a great way to increase your bottom line by reasonably deceptive means, by capitalising costs that should really be flowing through the P&L. So they're applying that standard to a non-profit entity where we have no incentive to do that. We just want it recorded correctly and funded correctly as we want it. So I suppose that's why I'm going that would be sort of the kind of discussion we'd have about this, where it's an accounting standard, we accept it, but we're just saying, no, it doesn't apply to this organisation in the way you're wanting to apply it. And
I think we've done this conversation pretty much now, and we've got some really good outcomes from it, and we'll pick up on it. But if we hand on heart feel like we're building an asset that's something that's really useful for the future, and that and we honestly think that we should be able to capitalise and appreciate them, we should stick to our guns on this stuff. Hey, look, I'm going to ask if somebody. Sorry, Sven, did you have one more?
The Health and Disability Commissioner complaint, so I didn't see there's 3 of them noted there. I was only aware of one, which I saw in the paper was resolved and lessons learned. Was there another? 2, or
No,
they-
so when we took over Waitaki District Health Service, there were 5 notified issues. Of those 5 notified issues, 2 were shut down. In the Waitaki District Health Services meeting yesterday, I shared with the board that there was 1 complaint which was close to coming back through for feedback from Health New Zealand and from Waitaki District Health Services. The other 2 are not formal investigations. They are, I forget the phrase that they used, but they are being dealt with. But there are 3 outstanding. I've had feedback that we should expect that they are working well through the resolution process, and I've got confidence that they'll be resolved. Look, could I have somebody move that we accept the recommendations of how we respond to audit? Moved by Dan, seconded by Sven. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's carried. That also brings us to the end of the public session today, I believe, Ali. And so with that, I'd like to thank everybody that's joined us online. I appreciate your interest and your attendance, and look forward to bringing you some of the agenda items that we've discussed today and the outcomes from them at the next PAR meeting on the 31st. And so with that, could I please ask that somebody move that we go into public excluded? Moved by Mayor Tavendale, seconded by Sven. All those in favour? Against? Thank you, that's carried.